The door handle used to creak a little when I came home. Just a soft, metallic groan. Nothing special, but it was mine. That sound meant I had made it through another day. Another shift mopping floors, scrubbing toilets, folding towels that would never touch my skin. And every time I heard that creak, I smiled, because behind that door was the house I had built with my 2 hands. 15 years. 15 years of sweat, of missed birthdays, of eating rice and eggs 5 days a week so I could make that mortgage payment. My back hurt every morning, my knees crackled with every step, but I didn't care. That house was my pride, my fortress, my proof that I was more than a ghost in this country. But now, that sound is gone. So is the key. So is the door. And the house? It's not mine anymore. It belongs to the boy I raised, the boy I protected with my life, the boy who used to fall asleep with his head on my lap while I whispered stories about a future we'd build together. That boy grew up. That boy sold our house. He didn't even tell me. I found out through a cold, indifferent voice on the phone from a detention center in El Paso. I had been detained. And while I waited, numb and handcuffed, someone from my neighborhood called and told me, almost like it was gossip, "Your son's moving. He sold the house. Did you know?" My breath caught in my chest. At first, I thought it was a mistake, a lie. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I knew he was capable of it. I just didn't want to believe it. Not my Mateo. Not the boy I worked 18 hours a day to support. Not the boy who cried the first time I missed his school play and forgave me with a hug that smelled like peanut butter and crayons. But yes, that boy. He did it. He sold the house I broke my body to pay for. And he did it while I sat locked up, helpless, treated like nothing, like trash to be taken out of this country. I remember that morning like it's still happening. The fluorescent lights of the detention center buzzed above my head. The air was cold, too cold for my thin jacket. I held on to it like it could protect me from what was coming. I didn't even know why I had been taken. They just called my name, asked for ID I didn't have, and then put me in a van. No warning, no explanation, just silence and suspicion. Hours passed before anyone told me anything. And when they did, it wasn't comfort, it was confirmation. Someone had tipped them off. Someone knew I didn't have papers. Someone gave them my name, my schedule, my routines. The only people who knew all of that were family, my son. And in that moment, something inside me cracked. Not broke, not yet, but cracked like glass under pressure. The crack widened when I called him. He didn't pick up the first time, or the second. The third time, he answered. His voice was flat, distant, not surprised, not worried. And when I asked him what was going on, he didn't hesitate. "They came for you," he said. Just that, like I was a package that had finally been picked up. "And the house?" I asked. I was afraid to even say it out loud. That house, it was my heart in bricks and mortar. "It's done," he said. "I sold it. No explanation, no apology. Just, I sold it. And the worst part? He sounded relieved. I remember the silence that followed. I couldn't breathe. My fingers went numb around the phone. I didn't cry. Not then. Not while he was on the line. I refused to give him the satisfaction. But inside, my soul was screaming. That house wasn't just a building. It was every dollar I didn't spend on myself. Every night I stayed up late cleaning offices where no one knew my name. Every ache in my back. Every time I went without so he could have a new backpack, a warm jacket, a decent mattress to sleep on. He sold it like it meant nothing. And maybe to him it didn't. Maybe he never saw it the way I did. Maybe he just saw walls and bills and a title in his name. Because that's the cruelest irony. I had to put the house in his name. I couldn't buy it legally, not as an undocumented worker. So I used his documentation. I trusted him. I believed foolishly that blood was stronger than greed. I was wrong. And now, here I am. In a country that doesn't want me, stripped of the only home I had, betrayed by the only person I ever lived for. I still feel the weight of the keys that no longer hang from my purse. I still see the front steps in my dreams. I still hear the echo of our laughter in that narrow kitchen where we used to dance while dinner cooked. But it's gone. All of it. Because of him. Have you ever felt like a stranger to your own life? like someone pressed delete on everything you built and you're just floating. That's what it feels like now. I'm Dolores Benitez, 57, a mother, a worker, a survivor. But what am I now? I look around this detention center and I see women like me. Women with stories that would shatter your heart. Women who cleaned your hospitals, took care of your children, served your food. And now we're here. Like we're disposable. Like we were never part of this country, even though we bled for it every day. But what hurts the most isn't the cold floor, or the bad food, or the humiliation. What hurts the most is knowing that while I sit here, Mateo is out there. Free, sleeping in a bed I paid for. Spending money that came from my hands. Living the life I gave him while erasing me like I never existed. I wonder if he even remembers how hard I worked. If he remembers me coming home with swollen feet and hands cracked from bleach. If he remembers me falling asleep at the table, spoon in hand, because I was too tired to eat. I wonder if he remembers the times I skipped meals so he could have enough. Or if he just remembers me as a shadow that hovered over him, asking where he was, what he was doing, trying to keep him safe. Maybe he thought I was a burden. Maybe he got tired of me. Maybe someone convinced him that selling the house was just taking what's his. I don't know. And maybe I'll never know. But I do know this. I gave him everything. And he gave me silence in return. If you're watching this, if you've ever felt like you gave your soul to someone who threw it away, tell me. Write it in the comments. Say, I gave everything and it wasn't enough. Or tell me your version. Let's not suffer in silence. Let's show them we're still here. Still speaking, still fighting, because my story isn't over yet, not even close. I still remember the first time someone called me invisible. Not to my face, of course. No one ever says it directly. But you feel it, in the way people avoid eye contact when you scrub their floors, the way they talk about you like you're not there. I was standing in a client's laundry room, folding towels that smelled like lavender and money, and I heard them laughing in the next room. One of the women said, God, I wish I had someone like her at home. Quiet, efficient. You barely notice she's there. They didn't even bother to whisper. And in that moment, I realized that I had become what this country wanted me to be. Silent, obedient, background noise. But I wasn't always like this. My name is Dolores Benitez. I'm 57 years old. Born in Zacatecas, Mexico, under the blistering sun and the weight of silence that comes from being born a girl in a place where that means nothing. I was raised by my grandmother after my parents disappeared, one from alcohol, the other from shame. My grandmother used to say, the world don't listen to women like us, so we have to shout with our work. And I did. For my whole life, I did. I arrived in the United States with nothing but a belly full of fear and a dream growing under my heart. I was pregnant, barely 21, and already carrying a lifetime of exhaustion. I crossed the border in the back of a truck with 18 other people. The air smelled like sweat and diesel. No one spoke much. Some prayed, some just stared ahead. I remember clutching my belly and whispering to it, you'll be born somewhere better than I was. You'll have a name they won't forget. That was my promise to Mateo. I worked 3 jobs in those first years. Housekeeping in the morning. Kitchen prep in the afternoon, night cleaning at an office building downtown. I slept in shifts, 2 hours here, 3 hours there, on a mattress I shared with another woman in a room that smelled like bleach and broken dreams. But every time I looked at my son, I knew why I was doing it. Every diaper I changed in someone else's house, every floor I scrubbed, every time someone looked through me like I was a smudge on the window, I was doing it for him. Mateo grew up surrounded by plastic-covered furniture, leftover takeout, and my tired smile. I used to come home and find him asleep on the couch, still in his school uniform, a book open on his chest. I'd kiss his forehead and feel the guilt twist in my stomach like a knife. I was always too late, too tired, too absent, but I never stopped showing up. People think being a mother is just love, but sometimes it's pure survival. Sometimes it's counting quarters at the end of the week and choosing between milk or gas. Sometimes it's hiding your pain behind a smile because your child is watching. And I hid so much. When Mateo turned 8, I started saving for a house. It didn't seem possible at first. I was undocumented. I didn't exist on paper, but I existed in sweat. And sweat builds dreams, slowly but surely. I took every overtime shift I could, gave up lunch breaks, canceled every holiday. I watched other people live their lives while I buried mine to build something solid, something permanent. By the time Mateo was 17, I had scraped together enough to make it happen. We found a house on the south side of Chicago. It wasn't much, a narrow 2-bedroom bungalow with peeling paint and a leaky roof. But to me, it was a castle. The first time I turned the key in that door, I felt something shift in me. I wasn't just a worker anymore. I was a homeowner. And more than that, I was a mother who kept her promise. But I couldn't put the house in my name. I didn't have a social security number. I didn't have legal status. The bank wouldn't even let me breathe near the paperwork. So I did the only thing I could do. I put it in Mateo's name. I told myself it didn't matter, that we were family, that names on paper couldn't measure love. I was wrong. At first, everything was beautiful. Mateo was proud. He even helped me repaint the kitchen. We picked out curtains together. He said it felt like home. I believed him. I wanted to believe that everything I had done, the sacrifices, the years, the hunger, the fear, had led to this. Stability, safety, a future. But slowly, things started to change. He grew more distant, more restless. He started coming home late, smelling like liquor and disappointment. He stopped helping around the house, stopped asking me how my day was. And then the comments started. "This is my house," he'd say, usually during arguments. "You just live here." At first I thought he was joking, a stupid thing said in anger. But the words dug under my skin. They made me question everything. Had I created a monster? Or had I just become invisible to him too? I tried to talk to him, to remind him how hard I worked, to tell him this wasn't just his house, it was our dream. But he would roll his eyes, put in his headphones, and walk away. Sometimes he would yell, slam doors, tell me to stop acting like a victim. But I wasn't acting. I was a victim of a system that used me, of a society that erased me, of a son who forgot who I was. And yet, even then, I never thought he would go that far. Never thought he would betray me completely. Never imagined that while I was being detained, scared, confused, alone, he would be signing papers, handing over keys, accepting money for something that was never his to sell. That betrayal, it sits in my chest like a brick, heavy, unmoving. I still hear his voice sometimes in my sleep, that flat tone, that final sentence. It's done. I sold it. No shame, no hesitation, just closure for him, and devastation for me. People say betrayal comes from strangers, but that's not true. Real betrayal comes from the people you love, the ones you trust, the ones you built your world around. And when they knock it down, you don't just lose the house, you lose yourself. That's where I am now, trying to gather the pieces, trying to understand where I went wrong, trying to breathe without the walls that once held me. I don't know if you've ever been there, in that place where the person you love becomes the person who breaks you. But if you have, if you've felt that ache in your bones, that scream in your throat that never comes out, I want you to comment something, anything, just so I know I'm not alone. Say, "I understand you," or "I've been there," or even just listening. Because sometimes, knowing someone out there hears you, that's the only thing keeping you alive. And I want to live, not just survive. I want to tell the rest of this story. I want to show you what happens next. Because this is just the beginning. I wish I could say I grew up in a place filled with laughter, music, and warm kitchens. But that would be a lie. I grew up in silence. The kind of silence that clings to your skin and makes your heartbeat sound too loud. In my village in Zacatecas, the air was dry and thin, like it didn't want you breathing too much of it. My earliest memory is not a hug or a lullaby. It's my mother walking away with a suitcase, never looking back. And my father? A ghost with alcohol on his breath. I learned early that love was unreliable. That safety was something you had to create for yourself. It was my grandmother who raised me. A woman with hands like bark and eyes like stone. She didn't speak often, but when she did, her words hit like truth. "You can't wait for someone to save you," she'd say. "No one is coming, not for girls like us." And I believed her, every single word. By the time I was 10, I was cooking, cleaning, and sewing like a grown woman. By 15, I had already buried the idea of childhood. I didn't have that luxury. I was surviving. So when I got pregnant at 21, I wasn't scared. I was determined. That baby inside me wasn't a mistake. He was my restart, my revolution. I didn't cry when I found out. I didn't panic. I made a decision. I was going to give my child what I never had, a real home, a real shot. And I knew that would never happen if I stayed. In Zacatecas, there were no jobs, no future, only dirt roads, broken promises, and eyes that never saw you for who you were. So I left. Crossing the border was not an act of rebellion. It was survival. I didn't do it because I hated my country. I did it because I loved my son before he was even born. I walked through heat that made the soles of my shoes melt. I drank water that tasted like rust. I hid behind cacti, prayed with strangers, and tried not to scream when my legs cramped so bad I thought I'd never walk again. But I made it, barely. And when I crossed into the U.S. under the cover of night, my hands pressed against my belly, I whispered, "You're free now, even if I never am." I arrived in El Paso with nothing but a plastic bag and a number scribbled on a napkin. A friend of a friend, someone who could help me find a place to sleep. That first night, I shared a room with 5 other women, all of them carrying stories heavier than suitcases. One of them had just buried her baby in the desert. Another had been assaulted on the way over. And yet, we still smiled. We still braided each other's hair. We still held hands like lifelines, because that's what women do. We survive in circles. We carry each other through hell. I moved to Chicago because I heard there were jobs. I didn't care what kind. I would clean toilets. I would carry bricks. I would do anything except go back. And that's exactly what I did. I cleaned houses in the mornings, restaurants in the afternoons, and office buildings at night. I sent money back to Mexico until I could afford to bring my son over legally. I saved every dollar like it was sacred. I skipped meals. I wore the same shoes for 3 years. I learned to live on hope and caffeine. When Mateo finally arrived, I thought everything would change. And it did, but not in the way I imagined. He was quiet at first, withdrawn. He had my eyes, my stubbornness, but none of my fire. I tried to love him loud. I tried to make up for lost time. But there's no manual for parenting through trauma. I didn't know how to talk to a child who had crossed borders without me. I didn't know how to explain why I wasn't there for his scraped knees, his nightmares, his first words. We coexisted. That's the word. Not lived. Coexisted. He went to school. I went to work. We passed each other like shadows in a hallway. I left notes in his lunchbox. He left dishes in the sink. I wanted more, but I didn't know how to ask. Maybe I was afraid. Afraid he would look at me and see not a mother, but a stranger. A woman who gave him life, but couldn't give him presence. Still, I believed we would get there. I believed that love would fill the cracks. That over time, he would see what I had sacrificed. That the bond between mother and son would win. It didn't. Over the years, our distance became routine. He had friends, girls, secrets. And I had bleach, calloused hands, and aching feet. I kept working. I kept saving. I kept believing that one day we'd sit at the kitchen table and he'd say, "Thank you," that he'd see me. But life doesn't always reward faith. Sometimes it punishes it. The house was supposed to be our redemption. It was supposed to be the thing that brought us back together. When we moved in, I decorated it with second-hand furniture and first-hand dreams. I cooked his favorite meals. I painted his room in the color he chose. I even bought a little sign for the front door that said, "Home is where Mom is." I thought he'd laugh. He didn't. He said it was corny. I didn't care. I still hung it. And now it's gone. Probably thrown in the trash with everything else I ever gave him. Some nights, when the guards in detention turn off the lights and the silence becomes unbearable, I close my eyes and imagine that sign. I imagine it hanging, just slightly crooked, catching the light from the hallway window. I imagine Mateo walking past it every morning, pretending not to see it, and I wonder if he ever read it, if he ever understood what it meant. That's what this story is about, isn't it? Not just deportation, not just betrayal, but erasure. The slow, brutal process of being erased by the people you loved most. of watching your own life be rewritten by someone else. And no matter how hard you scream, no one hears you. Because to them, you're just a ghost, a burden, an invisible mother who gave too much. If you're still here, if you've listened this far, I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt invisible in your own story? Like someone else took the pen and started writing without asking? Leave a comment. Say, I've felt erased, or this is too real, or even, I see you. You don't know who might need to read your words. You don't know whose silence you might break. Sometimes, the hardest part isn't the pain itself, it's the silence that follows. The silence of knowing that after everything you've given, everything you've endured, no one is coming to check on you. No one is knocking, no one is asking, are you okay? You sit with it, this silence, and it wraps around you like a wet blanket, heavy, suffocating, and familiar. That's what it was like after the house, after the phone call, after Mateo's words rang through my head like an echo chamber that never stops. I sold it. He said it like he was announcing the weather, like he hadn't just severed the last thread that tied me to a lifetime of sacrifice. It didn't sound like revenge. It didn't even sound angry. It was worse than that. It was indifferent. And if you've ever loved someone who became indifferent to your pain, you know exactly how that feels. It's colder than hate, more violent than yelling. Because hate at least means you still matter enough to be hated. Indifference means you've been erased. In that detention center, I had no name, just a number. I still remember it, A3791624. That was me, a code, a file, a statistic. I had no voice in there, just whispers in my head, memories replaying over and over again like old videotapes that can't stop rewinding. I tried to sleep, but I could still feel the keys to the house in my hand, even though they were gone. I could still smell the lavender floor cleaner I used in the kitchen. I could still see Mateo's baby pictures on the hallway wall, right before he took them down without telling me. Replaced them with posters, then with nothing. Eventually that wall was blank. Like me. There's something brutal about being deported, but it's not just about being sent away. It's about how easily they do it, how mechanical it all feels. You are processed, fingerprinted, labeled, logged, and prepared like cargo. I didn't even get a chance to pack. No time to grab clothes, pictures, letters, nothing. 1 minute, I was standing in line at the grocery store, picking out tomatoes for a soup I used to make when Mateo was sick. And the next minute, I was face down on the pavement, hands behind my back, eyes burning from the gravel and disbelief. I kept thinking, this can't be happening. Not now. Not after all these years. I had paid taxes, worked under-the-table jobs, never committed a crime, never hurt anyone. I had played by every unfair rule. I thought I had earned some kind of invisible protection. But you don't get protection when you don't exist on paper. You get erased. Quietly. The officer who booked me didn't even look at me. He asked the standard questions like he was ordering a sandwich. Name, date of birth, entry year, country of origin. I could have been anyone. I wanted to scream, I'm a mother, I'm a homeowner. I worked 16-hour days for 2 decades. I have a life. I matter. But I didn't scream. I just said, Dolores, 57, Zacatecas, like I was confessing to something. After a few days in that cold, sterile cell, I started to disappear. Not physically, no. That would have been easier. But mentally, emotionally, my memories began to feel like they belonged to someone else. The woman scrubbing floors in the house she bought with her own hands? That wasn't me. The woman teaching her son how to ride a bike in the alleyway behind their house, her back aching but her smile wide? That wasn't me either. The woman who made tamales every Christmas and hid the biggest one from Mateo in the back of the fridge? A ghost. A myth. I was just a woman in a cage, wearing a jumpsuit, watching everything she built fall into someone else's hands. And every night, I kept asking myself the same question. Why? Why would he do this to me? Why sell the house without telling me? Why betray me when I gave him everything? I didn't party. I didn't date. I didn't waste money. Every paycheck went to him. Every step I took was for him. And yet, he took the one thing that wasn't even about material value. That house, our house, was the symbol of my life. He sold it like it was a used couch on Craigslist. Some people might say, he's young. He doesn't understand. But no, Mateo was old enough to know better, old enough to call a realtor, old enough to sign documents, old enough to cash the check. What kind of person do you have to become to do that to your own mother? To sell the roof she bled for? Maybe you think I'm being dramatic. Maybe you think I should just move on, start over, forgive. But I want you to really imagine it. Imagine working every day for 15 years, skipping meals, crying yourself to sleep, never going to the doctor because it's too expensive, never buying anything for yourself, and then having the only thing you own taken from you by the person you love most. How do you come back from that? They tell you in detention to stay strong, but no one tells you what that actually means. It doesn't mean lifting weights or keeping your chin up. It means crying silently into your pillow so the others don't hear. It means whispering your own name under your breath so you don't forget it. It means remembering that once, a long time ago, someone loved you enough to stay, and maybe someday, someone will love you again. I started talking to a woman in the bunk next to me. Her name was Flor. She had been in there for 3 weeks. She had 5 kids in Arizona. Her youngest had just turned 2. She hadn't spoken to them since she was picked up at a traffic stop. She was deported 2 days later. No goodbye, no closure, just gone. And I realized this wasn't just happening to me. It was happening to thousands of women like me. Quiet women, hard-working women, forgotten women. Women who gave their lives to this country and were discarded like used napkins. Flor told me something I'll never forget. One night, when I couldn't stop crying, she reached over, took my hand, and said, "You are not disposable, Dolores. You are not trash. They may not see you, but I do." That broke me open. Because when you've been invisible for so long, just being seen feels like a miracle. If you're still here, still watching, still listening to this story, I want you to know something. You matter. Your pain matters. Your story matters. If someone's ever made you feel like you're forgettable, say it in the comments. Say, "I am not disposable," or "My voice matters," or "I see you." Say it not just for me, but for every woman who's sitting in silence, waiting for someone to remind her that she exists. The worst part about being forgotten is that eventually you start to forget yourself. Your memories become shadows. Your voice becomes quieter. And the things you once held close, the tiny symbols of who you were, start to slip through your fingers like sand. I used to remember everything. The smell of my son's shampoo, the way the kitchen light would flicker at 6:32 every evening, the sound of the mail slot when the mortgage bill arrived. Now, it all blends into this cold, gray haze, like someone's taken a wet cloth and smudged the outlines of my life. But even in that numbness, I held on to one thing like a lifeline. My truth. And that truth, no matter how much they tried to bury it under deportation orders and paperwork, had weight. It had scars. It had years. And it had a name. Mateo. I thought about him constantly. Not because I missed him. Not because I still believed he would come around. But because I needed to understand. I kept replaying our last conversation in my head, trying to find something I missed. Some clue. Some hidden signal. I wanted to believe he was manipulated, confused, pressured. But deep down, I knew better. Mateo didn't hesitate. He didn't stutter. He didn't even sound sad. When he told me he sold the house, he sounded like someone who had been waiting for the opportunity. And that, more than anything, broke me. I raised him to be better than this. I raised him with stories, with traditions, with discipline and softness and sacrifice. I showed him what love looked like in the form of blistered hands and empty stomachs. I stayed up sewing patches onto his backpack when I could barely keep my eyes open. I took night shifts so he wouldn't have to worry about school supplies. And when he got older, I protected him from truths he wasn't ready to face. Like how many times I came home to eviction notices I tore up before he saw them. Like how I ate cereal for dinner so he could have meat. So how did we get here? That question haunted me through every processed step of deportation. From the holding cell, to the transport van, to the chain-linked gate that opened onto the dirt road at the edge of Juarez. They handed me a bag of what they said were my belongings. But the only thing inside was a pair of worn shoes and a folded paper with my name misspelled. No wallet, no ID, no photos, no proof of the life I had lived for nearly 20 years. It felt like being born again, but into a world that didn't want me. I walked out of that gate and just stood there. No one waiting. No idea where to go. I looked around and saw other women sitting on the curb, crying softly. Some were on phones, begging relatives for help. Others just stared into space. I joined them, sat on the edge of the unknown, and tried to remember who I used to be. Someone eventually offered me a ride to a shelter. A quiet woman named Camilla. She didn't ask questions. She just opened her car door and handed me a bottle of water. That was the first act of kindness I'd received in days, and I cried. Not because I was weak, but because when you've been treated like a criminal for so long, a small act of humanity hits you like thunder. The shelter was crowded, but clean. Mostly women, mostly older, some with children clinging to their skirts, some still wearing the same clothes they were detained in. We were all strangers, but the pain in our eyes was identical. You didn't need to speak to know someone else had been torn away from everything. You could see it in the way they held their arms, like they were still trying to hold on to someone who wasn't there anymore. That night, as I lay on a cot with springs that squeaked every time I breathed, I stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the last time Mateo said, "I love you." I couldn't. Maybe it was during his graduation. Maybe it was when he was 10 and I made him caldo de pollo when he was sick. Maybe it never happened. Maybe I was the only one holding on to the illusion. And yet, despite everything, I still couldn't let go completely. That's the sick part about love. It doesn't follow logic. It doesn't care about betrayal or paperwork or property deeds. It lingers, like perfume on a pillow, like music from another room. You think it's gone, but then it comes back in waves. The next morning, I asked the shelter staff if I could make a phone call. They were kind, efficient, overworked. They gave me a prepaid card and pointed to a row of phones against the wall. My hands shook as I dialed his number. I didn't know what I was going to say. I didn't even know if he would answer. He did. His voice was calm. Like mine didn't haunt him. Like my absence was just another item checked off a list. I said, "Mateo, it's me." He said, "I know." Silence. Then I asked him, "Why?" He sighed, like he was tired of the question, tired of being questioned. He said, "Because I needed to move on. I couldn't do that with you still in my life." Move on? I wanted to scream. Move on from what? From the woman who gave him everything? From the home he never paid a cent for? From the meals, the laundry, the stability, the love? But I didn't scream. I said the only thing I could manage without breaking. "I didn't deserve this." He replied, "Maybe not, but neither did I." And then he hung up. That call didn't give me closure. It didn't give me answers, but it did give me clarity. Mateo had rewritten the story. In his version, I was the villain, controlling, overbearing, always watching, never letting him breathe. And maybe I did try too hard to keep him close. Maybe I did hold on too tightly, but not out of power, out of fear, out of love, out of desperation to keep the one good thing in my life from drifting away. And still, he drifted. If you've ever loved someone who turned your love into a weapon, I want you to tell me. Comment below, "I loved too much," or "I held on too long," or even just, "I understand." Because these stories matter. These feelings are real, and speaking them out loud is a form of healing. I don't know what my next step is yet, but I know I can't go back. Not to the house, not to the country that erased me, not to the son who sold my name like it had no value. After he hung up, I sat there with the receiver still against my ear, listening to the dial tone as if it might turn back into his voice. But it didn't. It just rang and rang and rang, an empty sound that filled my chest more than his words ever could. My hand trembled as I placed the phone back on the hook. I looked around the shelter, at the chipped paint on the wall, at the bulletin board cluttered with flyers for job training, clinics, missing relatives. No one was watching me, and yet I felt completely exposed, like my pain had leaked into the room and everyone could feel it. There's something about betrayal from your own child that makes you question your worth at the core. It's not just about what they did. It's about what that act says about you. I kept asking myself, was I too much? Was I not enough? Did I love him wrong? Did I fail him? Or did I raise him right and he chose wrong anyway? That's the part no one prepares you for. The shame. People say things like, he's his own person now, or you did the best you could. But those words feel hollow when you're sleeping on a cot in a country you haven't seen in 20 years. And the child you gave your life to is asleep in your bed, under your roof, with money in his pocket from a home he never earned. I remember sitting on that thin mattress, clutching my coat around me even though it wasn't that cold. I felt like I needed to hold something, anything, that still belonged to me. But even the coat was borrowed. A woman named Lydia had handed it to me the night before. She said she'd gotten it from a church box down the road. You can have it, she whispered. I've got two. That's the kind of kindness you find among the discarded. We don't have much, but we share what we can. Not because it's enough, but because we know what it's like to have nothing. The next few days passed in a blur of questions. Where would I go? What would I do? I had no home here, no family, no job history that meant anything in Mexico. Everything I had built was on the other side of a border that now treated me like a disease. And still, something inside me refused to give up. It wasn't pride. It wasn't even hope. It was survival. The same instinct that got me across the border 20 years ago. The same fire that kept me working through fevers and injuries and heartbreak. It whispered, "You are not done." So I got up. I went to the shelter's front desk and asked if they had lists of local places hiring. The woman, Maria, gave me a list with 6 places on it: cleaning services, laundromats, a bakery. I looked at each one like a lifeline, even though every cell in my body ached. It had only been a week since I was released, and I still walked like I wasn't sure I was allowed to stand. But I walked anyway. I took the bus to a small bakery on the east side of town. I remember the smell: yeast, sugar, cinnamon. It reminded me of a time before everything fell apart. The owner, a woman named Teresa, looked me up and down and said, "You know how to work?" I nodded. "Good," she said. "Start tomorrow. Cash only. That's how it begins again. Not with a breakthrough, not with a miracle, with bread." The job was simple: washing pans, wiping tables, folding paper around pastries. I didn't speak much. I kept my head down. I showed up early. I stayed late. It wasn't much, but it was something. At the end of my first week, Teresa handed me a small envelope. Inside was a single bill, 500 pesos. The old me might have cried. But now I simply tucked it into my coat pocket and whispered, "Gracias." Every night after work, I'd return to the shelter and write in a notebook they'd given us. Pages filled with scribbles, prayers, questions, and memories. Sometimes I'd write letters I never sent. To Mateo, to my old boss in Chicago, to the neighbor who always left tamales by our door at Christmas. It didn't matter if they'd ever read them. It only mattered that I remembered I had a voice. That's something I want you to hear, especially if you're going through something right now that makes you feel small, forgotten. If you're carrying betrayal, loss, or abandonment in your chest like a stone, please write something. Don't keep it inside. Comment below, "My story still matters," or "I'm still here," or "They tried to silence me, but I'm still speaking." You never know who needs to read those words. You never know who's waiting for permission to speak their pain out loud. One night, after closing the bakery, Teresa sat with me out back. She smoked a cigarette, and I sipped on a coffee that had gone cold. "You've been through something," she said, not as a question, but as a fact. I just nodded. "You got family here?" "No." "Back in the States?" I hesitated. "Not anymore." She looked at me for a long time. Then she said something I'll never forget. "People think blood means loyalty, but sometimes strangers are more family than your own blood ever was." She was right. I had found more comfort in the hands of women in a shelter, in a second-hand coat, in a boss who barely knew my name but gave me a chance, than I ever had in that final phone call with my son. That's the truth, a painful one. But sometimes truth is the only thing that can clean a wound. I started saving again. coins in a plastic jar, bills folded carefully into the lining of my purse. I wasn't sure what I was saving for. Maybe a room of my own, maybe papers, maybe a lawyer. But having a goal, even a vague one, kept me sane. At night, I still dreamed of the house. Not the one Mateo sold. The one I dreamed of long before that. The one with wildflowers in the yard and laughter in the kitchen. A place where I wasn't just tolerated. I was loved, respected, seen. I don't know if I'll ever find that house. But I do know this. I am rebuilding. Brick by emotional brick. Scar by scar. Day by day. And no one, no system, no betrayal, no signature on a deed can take that from me again. If you're still watching, still here, tell me something real. Tell me if you've ever had to start over with nothing. Say, I've rebuilt from ashes, or I'm finding my way, or simply, keep going, Dolores. Because every comment, every voice, reminds me this story isn't just mine. It belongs to all of us who've loved, lost, and still refuse to disappear. There's a strange kind of silence that lives inside you when you've been torn from everything familiar. It doesn't scream. It doesn't rage. It just hums, quietly, behind your ribs. And sometimes, in the middle of the night, when you roll over on a mattress that isn't yours, in a country you once fled, you mistake that silence for peace. But it isn't peace. It's survival trying to pass as rest. I had been working at the bakery for 3 months when I stopped jumping every time someone said immigration. The fear hadn't disappeared. It had simply folded itself into a corner of my body, like an old injury you learn to move around. My hands were stronger again, rough from dough and bleach, and my feet hurt in that familiar way that reminded me I was, once again, a worker, not a prisoner, not a ghost. Just a woman with a job and a name. And still, I avoided mirrors. I didn't want to see her, the woman I had become. Her eyes too tired, her shoulders too sloped, her mouth always pressed into that line between, please don't hurt me, and, I dare you to try. I didn't hate her. I just didn't recognize her. One morning, Teresa asked me to stay late to help with an order. A wedding, she said. 75 pan dulces. My fingers ached halfway through, but I kept going. There was something oddly comforting about repetition. The folding, the sprinkling, the warmth. For those few hours, I wasn't the woman whose son sold her house. I wasn't the woman who slept in shelters or crossed deserts or counted coins in the dark. I was just a baker, a woman making something sweet for someone else's celebration. After we finished, she handed me a pastry wrapped in brown paper. For you, she said. You deserve something soft, too. I took it home, if you can call a shared shelter cot home, and sat under the fluorescent light, peeling back the paper like it was gold. And for the first time in months, I ate something I hadn't made with my own tired hands. I closed my eyes and let the sugar melt on my tongue. It tasted like forgiveness. And that night, I wrote something different in my notebook. I didn't write about Mateo. I didn't write about ice or pain or betrayal. I wrote about the smell of cinnamon, about how Teresa laughed with her whole chest, about how sometimes healing comes in the shape of bread. And it hit me. Maybe my story wasn't over. Maybe I wasn't meant to go back to what I had. Maybe I was meant to build something entirely new. But even with that small flicker of hope, the wounds remained. Not bleeding anymore, but still raw, still aching. A week later, I saw someone who looked like Mateo on the street. Same walk, same jawline. For half a second, my heart leapt. I wanted to run, to call out his name, to believe, just for one crazy moment, that he had followed me, that he had changed his mind, that he had come to find me, to apologize, to say, I was wrong, but it wasn't him. Of course it wasn't him. I stood there on the sidewalk for a long time, watching that stranger walk away, and I whispered, you don't get to come back. I wasn't even talking to him. I was talking to the part of me that still waited, that still held out hope. That still flinched every time the phone rang. I wanted to stop flinching. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I took down every picture of him in my notebook. I tore out the letters I wrote, but never sent. I folded them carefully, like I was folding laundry one last time, and I placed them in a shoebox I had found near the bakery. Then I walked 2 blocks to the canal, sat on the edge, and one by one, I dropped them into the water. Not to forget him, but to let go of the version of him I created to survive. I watched the papers float, then sink. Some dissolved quickly, others resisted. I knew that feeling. I had resisted too. There was no ceremony, no grand realization. Just a woman sitting at the edge of the water, letting go of ghosts. I think that's what healing really is. Not a loud, triumphant moment, not a dramatic breakdown. Just small choices. Choosing to let go. Choosing to keep going. Choosing not to call the number you've memorized by heart. Choosing to stop checking if your name is still on the deed to a house that no longer exists. Because that was the real betrayal. Not that he sold it, but that he erased me from it. And I'm done trying to exist in spaces that don't want to remember me. I've started saving again. Not for a house, not yet, but for something even more fragile. Myself. Some nights, when I walk home from the bakery, I look up at the windows of the buildings I pass. I imagine what kind of families live there. I wonder if they fight, if they love each other, if the mother ever sits at the edge of her son's bed and thinks, he has no idea how much I gave up for him. And if she does, I hope she knows she's not alone. And neither am I. Because now I have this voice, this space, this chance to speak, even if it trembles. I don't know who's still watching, or how far this story will reach. But if you're hearing me, if any part of this feels familiar, leave a comment. Let me know I'm not just screaming into the void. Say, I'm healing too. Or, I had to let go. Or even just, still here, Dolores. Say whatever feels right. Because sometimes knowing someone is out there, listening, that's the only light some of us have. The day I let the letters sink into the canal, I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel triumph. I felt hollow. Like someone had scooped out all the noise inside me and left only an echo. But maybe that echo was necessary. Maybe it's the emptiness that allows space for something new. I didn't know what was coming, or even what I wanted anymore. But I knew what I didn't want. I didn't want to carry weight that wasn't mine. I didn't want to keep nurturing a wound that would never apologize for cutting me open. Some days after that were easier. I moved through the bakery like I was a part of it, kneading, wiping, smiling when I could. Teresa started trusting me with more. She'd leave me alone to close the shop, hand me the keys without hesitation. One day, she even asked me to help train a new girl, a 17-year-old named April, full of noise and questions and energy I had long forgotten. Watching her reminded me of a version of myself I hadn't thought about in years. The girl who crossed borders barefoot. The girl who held her pregnant belly and whispered dreams into the wind. The girl who believed love could fix anything. She was gone, yes, but not erased. Apprendizage, Teresa said to me one afternoon. Learning. She said it like it was a seed. Something you plant and wait for, even when the soil feels dead. You learn who people are, but more importantly, you learn who you are without them. That stayed with me. Because I had spent so long defining myself by my motherhood, by my sacrifices, by the person I was for someone else. But who was I now? Who was I when no one was watching, when no one needed me? That question scared me more than the deportation ever did. So I began to notice myself, quietly, carefully. I started waking up a few minutes earlier, just to sit with my coffee. I'd watch the sunrise through the shelter's kitchen window, the light breaking across the metal sinks like spilled gold. Sometimes I'd write one sentence in my notebook, just one, not about the past, not about Mateo, about me, about how the coffee tasted that day, about a dream I had, about the way April laughed like her joy had never been interrupted. I didn't realize it at the time, but those small moments, they were acts of reclaiming, of becoming. One night, Teresa asked if I had ever baked for joy, not for money, not for obligation, just because I wanted to. I hadn't. So she handed me her mother's recipe book, said I could pick anything. I flipped through the pages, some stained, some torn, some written in faded ink, and then I found it. Pastel de tres leches. My mother used to make it. Before she left. I hadn't tasted it in over 30 years. The next day, I stayed after my shift. I followed the steps like a prayer. Separated the eggs, beat the batter, poured the milk slowly. My hands moved with purpose. My eyes blurred from the steam. I didn't speak. I didn't hum. I just existed in that kitchen like I belonged there. When it came out of the oven, I didn't cry. I thought I would. But instead, I smiled. It smelled like home. A home that had never existed fully, but lived inside me anyway. I cut a slice and sat on the back steps. I ate it slowly, each bite a memory, not of people, but of feelings. Warmth, hope, possibility. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was restless, but because I felt alive. Like I had cracked open a door I thought was sealed forever. And that's when I decided something. I wasn't going to live the rest of my life in the shadows of what I had lost. I was going to build. Not for someone else this time. For me. The next morning, I asked Teresa if she would teach me more. Not just how to bake, but how to run the business. How to manage orders, talk to suppliers, balance costs. She raised an eyebrow, then nodded slowly. You have more inside you than sadness, Dolores. And I believed her. Because I had felt it. In the batter. In the early mornings. In the notebooks. In the way April looked at me like I had answers worth listening to. I started dreaming again. Not about houses or reunions or apologies that would never come. I started dreaming about having my own bakery one day. A small place, with yellow walls and a bell on the door, where the smell of cinnamon would live in the walls, where no one would ever feel erased. Where women like me, women who had been discarded, bruised, betrayed, could walk in and feel whole. It sounded foolish at first. I was undocumented in a country I barely remembered, with no savings, no citizenship, no protection. But dreams have always been foolish. And still, they carry us. I began saving harder. I picked up extra shifts. I offered to clean the shelter's bathrooms on weekends. I stopped spending on anything unnecessary. And little by little, I watched that envelope in my drawer thicken. It wasn't much, but it was mine. One Sunday, as I was folding towels at the shelter, a woman named Elena sat beside me. She was new, her face swollen from crying. I recognized that look. It was the look of someone whose life had just been pulled out from under her. She asked if I had family here. I paused. Then I said, no, but I have people. And it was true. I had Teresa. I had Abril. I had the women at the shelter who now called me Hermana. I had strangers online leaving comments on stories like mine, saying, you're not alone, saying, I see you, saying, keep going. And that meant something. If you're still here, still watching, still holding this story with me, I want you to share something. Just a line, a piece of your story. Say, I'm learning who I am, or I'm building from the broken, or just pan dulce and healing. Say whatever feels real to you, because someone out there needs to read it. Someone out there needs proof that rebuilding is possible, even after everything burns. There's a moment in healing that no one ever talks about. It's not loud. It's not cinematic. It's a quiet blink of time when you suddenly realize you're not hurting the same way anymore. The ache is still there, yes, but it's dulled. Like the scar that used to throb now only itches when it rains. You're still carrying it, but it's no longer dragging you down. That moment came to me one afternoon, while sweeping flour off the bakery floor. I was alone. The radio hummed low in the background. April had gone home early, and Teresa was on a supply run. The air smelled of yeast and heat and vanilla. As I moved the broom in wide, even strokes, I looked at my hands, strong, weathered, dusted white, and thought, these are not the hands of a woman who was destroyed. These were the hands of a survivor, a rebuilder, a creator. It didn't mean I was healed. Not completely, but something had shifted. The silence inside me had changed its shape. It no longer pressed on my lungs. It sat gently beside me, like an old friend, a witness. That night I walked back to the shelter slowly, not because I was tired, but because I wanted to feel the city, really feel it, the cracks in the sidewalk, the way the streetlights flickered, the soft hum of motorcycles in the distance. For the first time in years, I wasn't just passing through life, I was part of it again. At the corner store, I bought a single tamarindo candy. I hadn't tasted one since I left Zacatecas all those years ago. As I unwrapped it, I smiled. Bittersweet, just like me. In the following weeks, something else changed. People began looking at me differently, not with pity, not with curiosity, with respect. Elena, the new woman at the shelter, started asking me for advice. Abril began staying late just to talk. Even Teresa opened up about her own struggles, her divorce, her son who stopped calling, the bakery she almost lost. We became mirrors for each other, pieces of broken glass that, when placed side by side, reflected something whole. One morning, Teresa called me into the back office. She held an envelope in her hand. "I've been saving this," she said. "It's not much, but it's for you." Inside was a small stack of pesos, more than I had expected. I started to speak, to protest, but she stopped me. "You want to start something of your own one day," she said. "This is just a beginning, a seed. Take it." My hands trembled as I held the envelope. It wasn't about the money. It was about what it represented. Belief. In me. In my future. In the possibility that I was allowed to dream again. That night, I sat by the window of the shelter with my notebook open, but I didn't write anything. I just watched the stars. Each one felt like a small whisper saying, "Keep going." And I did. I started researching, quietly, at the library, on the shelter's computer, on scraps of paper, how to start a food stand, what licenses were required, what ingredients were affordable in bulk. I wasn't naive. I knew the odds, but I also knew the strength in my spine, the fire in my chest, the calluses on my hands. And then one day, while cleaning the glass display case at the bakery, Teresa turned to me and said, "Let's try it." "Try what?" "Your pastel de tres leches. Let's sell it this weekend. See what people say." I froze. It felt like someone handing you a microphone after years of being told to whisper. But I said yes. That Friday, I made 4 cakes, carefully, lovingly, the same way I made them when I was just a girl, watching my mother sing over the batter. I even added my own twist, a pinch of cardamom, a drizzle of honey, not to change it, but to make it mine. By noon Saturday, they were gone, all of them, sold to families and couples and little girls with sticky fingers. I stood behind the counter, pretending to be calm, but inside I was bursting, not from pride, but from something even sweeter, belonging. People came back the next day, asking for more. Teresa smiled at me like a mother might. "Looks like you've got something, Dolores." I did. I had something. Not a home, not a husband, not a son who called me, but something even more sacred, a purpose. And still, some nights, I cried. I missed Mateo in a way I can't explain. Not because I wanted him back, but because I wanted to unknow what he did. I wanted to remember him as he was, not as he became. But memory is not a tape you can rewind and pause at the pretty parts. You remember everything, or nothing. So I chose to remember everything, even the betrayal, even the silence, even the moment he chose a check over his mother. Because in remembering, I kept my story intact, and no one could erase that. I told Elena once, when she was feeling small and invisible, "You don't have to disappear just because someone couldn't love you the way you needed." She cried. I held her. We were 2 women broken in different places, healing in the same space. There's power in that. If you're listening to this, if you're watching from your phone, or your computer, or your bed where you've cried yourself to sleep too many nights, I want you to know, your pain doesn't make you unworthy. Your story, even the ugliest parts, has value. Your voice matters. If this touched you even a little, let me know. Write something in the comments. You can say, "I'm finding my way back," or "I'm not my pain," or even just, "Still rising." Say whatever your heart needs to say. Because sometimes those words, typed in the dark, whispered into the void, are what carry us forward. I used to think that healing was a destination, that if I just worked hard enough, cried enough, forgave enough, I'd finally arrive at some peaceful place where nothing hurt anymore. But the truth is, healing is more like waves, some days gentle, others violent. And on certain days, when you least expect it, the tide drags you under again. It happened one morning, out of nowhere. I was slicing strawberries in the bakery for a new topping Teresa wanted to try. The light hit the steel counter in just the right way, and suddenly, a memory crashed over me. Mateo's 7th birthday. The way he smeared frosting on my cheek and laughed so hard he fell over. The way I held him that night after everyone left, his small hand resting against my chest like I was his whole world. It wasn't the betrayal that hit me. It was the remembering of love, the purity of it, the tenderness that once existed between us like something holy. And now, knowing where we were, knowing what he'd done, I felt like I was mourning someone who was still alive. I had to step outside. The noise inside my chest was too loud. I sat on the back steps, hands shaking, and let the tears fall without apology. Teresa came out a few minutes later, said nothing, just sat beside me. That silence, shared and sacred, reminded me I didn't have to explain my pain to anyone. I was allowed to grieve, even if no one had died. The grief of the living can be worse sometimes, because there's no finality, just echoes. That night, back at the shelter, I pulled out my notebook again. I hadn't written in a few days. I think I was scared to, afraid of what might spill out. But I pressed the pen down anyway. I wrote, "Forgiveness is not permission. It's freedom." I repeated it like a prayer. I didn't know yet if I believed it, but I wanted to. Forgiveness. I had avoided that word for months. It felt too big, too generous, like offering gold to someone who never even looked you in the eye. But I started to realize it wasn't about Mateo. It wasn't about letting him off the hook. It was about letting myself go free, about cutting the rope that tied me to a version of myself who still waited for an apology that might never come. So I wrote it again. Forgiveness is not permission. It's freedom. And then I wrote his name. Just his name. No insults, no longing, no demands. Just Mateo. The next day, I brought a tres leches cake to the shelter. Not to sell, just to share. A small act. A soft thing. I cut slices for every woman, and we sat together in that too bright kitchen, eating with our fingers, laughing between bites. For the first time, the cake didn't taste like the past. It tasted like now. Later, Elena touched my arm and said, "You're different lately." I smiled. So are you. Because we were, all of us. We were blooming in cracks. We were learning to live with our bruises showing. We were proof that pain doesn't end a story. It changes the language. April turned into May. The days got longer, warmer. I started staying later at the bakery, helping with inventory, organizing receipts, watching Teresa like a student learning a sacred ritual. She trusted me more with each passing week. She even gave me a drawer in the back to store my things. That drawer became something holy to me, a symbol of permanence, of being seen. One morning, Teresa called me into her office again. This time she looked nervous. "I have to go," she said. "For a while. My sister in Monterey, she's sick." I nodded. "Take all the time you need." She hesitated. "I want you to run the place while I'm gone." I blinked. "Me? You've earned it. You've kept this place alive as much as I have." I didn't know what to say. My throat tightened. Not from fear, from something softer, something like pride. "I don't have papers," I whispered. "You have heart," she said, "and that's what feeds people." So I said yes. For the next 4 weeks, the bakery was mine. I didn't change much, just added more of what made it feel like home. I played softer music. I added fresh flowers to the counter. I smiled more. Not because I was pretending, but because I finally meant it. People started asking for me by name. "Is Dolores here? She made the pastel, right? That pan dulce yesterday, was that yours?" And every time I'd nod, heart swelling, hands steady. That was when I realized something I never thought I would. I could be whole, without what I had lost. Not despite it, because of it. Because I had walked through fire, through shame, through silence, and still, I was standing. If you're here with me, if you've made it this far into my story, I want to ask you something. Have you forgiven someone who never said sorry? Or maybe you're still trying. Either way, leave a piece of that in the comments. Say, "I'm choosing freedom," or "I still feel the weight." Say whatever's real for you, because every voice that rises here helps another remember they're not alone. The first time someone called me Yefa, Boss, I almost didn't respond. The word didn't feel like it belonged to me. For so long, I had lived in survival mode, waiting for someone else to decide if I was worth trusting, worth helping, worth hearing. But now, standing behind the counter with flour on my apron and sunlight streaming through the bakery window, it finally felt real. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. One afternoon, as I wiped down the glass case, a little girl pressed her face to the window outside. Her mother stood behind her, holding her hand. I opened the door and offered the child a cookie on the house. Her eyes lit up like I had handed her the moon. And when they left, I caught the mother looking back at me with something that went deeper than thanks. It was recognition. One woman seeing another. A silent exchange. We made it. And in that moment, I thought of all the women who didn't. The ones who crossed the border and never made it to the other side. The ones who gave everything to their children and were repaid with silence. The ones still sleeping in shelters, still waiting on documents, still wondering if they matter. This story, my story, is for them. Because even if no one else writes our names down, we remember. We carry each other. I've come to believe that every scar, every sleepless night, every whispered prayer in the dark is part of a larger tapestry, one that ties us together, even when we feel completely alone. And maybe that's what healing really is. Not erasing the pain, but stitching beauty around it. Some days, I still think about Mateo, not with hate, not even with sadness, just acceptance. He made his choice, and I made mine. I chose to keep going. I chose to build. I chose to live a life that's mine. And if you're listening to this, if you've been walking with me through every chapter, every ache, every small triumph, I want to thank you from the deepest part of my heart. Thank you for holding this story with tenderness. Thank you for showing up, not just for me, but for yourself. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that we're stronger together. When we tell our truths, we heal. When we listen to someone else's pain, we soften. When we say me too, we remind each other that survival is not shameful. It's sacred. So if this story touched something inside you, don't let it end here. Leave a comment below. Share a sentence, a word, a moment that made you feel seen. Say, I'm healing too, or your story is mine, or still standing. Your voice might be the exact light someone else needs right now. And if you want to keep walking this path of truth, of stories that matter, that hurt and heal at the same time, don't forget to subscribe. Here, every video is a reminder that your pain has a place, that your strength is honored, that your voice is welcome. And before you go, one last thing. There's another story waiting for you. A journey just as deep, just as real, just as human. It's right there on the screen. Click on the next video. Let's keep healing together. Thank you for being here. Thank you for surviving. Thank you for remembering me. Until the next story, I'll be waiting.